Imagine standing in the heart of ancient Rome, the Colosseum towering above you, legions marching through marble streets, and statues of gods watching from every corner. But behind all this grandeur were men who held the true power, men whose decisions shaped the destiny of the world. They weren't just rulers. They were conquerors, philosophers, reformers, and sometimes tyrants. Some expanded Rome until it seemed endless, others reforged it when it teetered on collapse, and a few left legacies so vast they still ripple through our lives today. Yet power in Rome was never permanent. It was tested on the battlefield, in the Senate, and in the hearts of its people. So who truly stood at the top? Who were the Caesars whose grip on history was so strong that their names still echo across 2,000 years? If you love diving into the rise and fall of history's greatest empires, you're in the right place. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive, and share this with someone who's as fascinated by Rome as you are. Let's bring the ancient world back to life together. Augustus, the founder of empire. The Roman Republic was dead. Civil war had ripped through its heart, leaving behind a broken senate, exhausted legions, and a people desperate for stability. Out of this chaos rose a young man, Octavian, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar. At first glance, he hardly seemed destined to reshape the world. He was sickly, quiet, and lacked the commanding presence of Caesar. Yet beneath that frail exterior was a mind as sharp as a gladius and an ambition that would not be denied. Octavian proved that in Rome, victory was not only won with swords, but with patience, cunning, and sheer political calculation. He outmaneuvered rivals like Mark Antony and Cleopatra, not just on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion. With each victory, he wrapped himself tighter in the image of a savior, not a tyrant. By the time he took the name Augustus, Rome had forgotten the Republic. It had found its emperor. But what made Augustus so powerful wasn't only that he seized the throne. It was that he transformed Rome itself. He crafted a new political system, the Principate, that gave the illusion of shared power while keeping ultimate authority firmly in his own hands. Senators still debated, laws were still passed, but everyone knew the real decisions came from Augustus. This delicate balance between tradition and absolute control gave Rome the stability it had craved for generations. Then came the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For nearly 2 centuries, much of the empire thrived under the foundations Augustus laid. Roads stretched across continents, commerce flourished, and cities glittered with marble and temples. He didn't just build monuments. He built the idea of Rome as eternal. The Arapacis, his altar of peace, still whispers his vision today, a Rome guided not by chaos, but by order. And yet Augustus was no gentle ruler. His power rested on the loyalty of his legions, carefully stationed across the empire. He secured their devotion with land, wealth, and the promise that serving Rome meant serving him. In this way, he ensured that no general could rise against him as his great-uncle Julius Caesar once had. The empire was his, and his alone. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Augustus was not his victories, nor his reforms, but his legacy. When he died in 14 CE, Rome did not crumble. Instead, it continued, stronger, more united, more ambitious. His name became synonymous with the very idea of Roman power. Every emperor who followed would be measured against him. So how powerful was Augustus? Powerful enough to turn the tide of history itself. Powerful enough to convince a fractured world that Rome's destiny lay not in democracy, but in empire. He was the architect of a new age, an age that would outlast him by centuries. Trajan, the conqueror. If Augustus built the empire, it was Trajan who stretched it to its furthest edges. By the time he took the throne in 98 CE, Rome was already vast, but under his rule, it became something the world had never seen before, an empire that touched the deserts of Arabia, the mountains of Armenia, and the rivers of northern Europe. Trajan wasn't just another emperor. He was Rome's greatest conqueror. Trajan began as a soldier's soldier. He knew the hardships of the camp, the bite of winter on campaign, and the weight of armor after long marches. The legions respected him because he lived as they did. When he became emperor, he carried that same grit into his leadership. To the common Roman, Trajan wasn't some distant figure draped in silk. He was a man of action, someone who had earned his command. His most famous campaigns came against Dacia in what is now Romania. The Dacian king Decebalus had long been a thorn in Rome's side, harassing its borders and humiliating generals. Trajan decided enough was enough. Twice he marched across the Danube with overwhelming force, bridging rivers and scaling mountains to bring the fight to Dacia's heartland. The wars were brutal, filled with sieges, ambushes, and desperate last stands. But in the end, Rome triumphed. Dacia was annexed, its gold mines swelling Rome's treasury, funding public works, and securing Trajan's reputation as a warrior emperor. But Trajan's power wasn't limited to the battlefield. He used his conquest to enrich Rome itself. He poured the spoils of war into infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, baths, and markets that transformed the city into the glittering jewel of the ancient world. His crowning achievement, Trajan's Forum, was not just a marketplace, but a monument to empire, a space that proclaimed Rome's dominance to every visitor. And towering above it all was Trajan's Column, spiraling upward with carved scenes of his Dacian victories, propaganda in stone, still standing after nearly 2,000 years. Yet perhaps what made Trajan truly powerful was how he balanced conquest with governance. He wasn't content with victory alone. He sought to ensure Rome's prosperity reached its people. Ancient writers praised him for his generosity, his sense of justice, and his respect for the Senate. Unlike many emperors who ruled by fear, Trajan inspired loyalty by combining military might with statesmanship. The Senate even declared him Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. Under Trajan, the Roman Empire reached its maximum territorial extent. His campaigns in the east pushed into Mesopotamia, brushing against the frontiers of Parthia. For a moment in time, it seemed that no horizon was beyond Rome's grasp. But empire is a fragile thing. Trajan's successors would struggle to hold what he conquered. Borders would contract, and the dream of endless expansion would fade. Still, for that one shining era, Rome stood at its absolute zenith, thanks to Trajan. He was the emperor who made Rome bigger, richer, and prouder than ever before. And his victories carved his name into history as not just a ruler, but a conqueror whose shadow stretched across the known world. Hadrian, the builder. When Trajan died in 117 CE, Rome's borders stretched farther than ever before. But with that expansion came an unspoken question. How far could Rome really go before it broke under its own weight? The man who inherited this vast empire, Hadrian, answered not with more conquest but with walls, fortifications, and a vision of Rome that prioritized endurance over endless expansion. Hadrian was unlike his predecessor. Where Trajan lived for the battlefield, Hadrian lived for ideas. He was a lover of Greek culture, a patron of the arts, and a man who believed that Rome's greatness wasn't measured only in territory, but in stability and identity. Instead of pushing further east into Mesopotamia, he pulled Rome's borders back, solidifying defenses. Some saw this as retreat, but Hadrian knew it was survival. His most famous legacy lies far from the marble streets of Rome, in the cold winds of northern Britain. Stretching across the rugged landscape, Hadrian's wall marked the edge of the empire. More than stone and mortar, it was a statement. This is Rome, and beyond this line lies the world we choose not to rule. It wasn't just a military barrier. It was a symbol of order, discipline, and Rome's ability to define its own boundaries. But Hadrian was more than a builder of walls. He reformed the military, ensuring discipline and readiness across the legions. He traveled constantly, perhaps more than any emperor before or after, personally inspecting garrisons, provinces, and infrastructure. From Gaul to Judea, from the Nile to the Danube, Hadrian left his mark as the emperor who didn't just sit in Rome but walked the roads of his empire. His love for architecture reshaped the eternal city itself. Hadrian rebuilt the Pantheon, giving it the massive dome that still inspires awe today, a feat of engineering so advanced it remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. He also constructed his grand villa at Tivoli, a sprawling complex of palaces, theaters, and gardens that reflected his passion for Greek art and philosophy. Through these works, Hadrian projected an image of an emperor who was not merely a soldier or politician, but a patron of civilization itself. Yet his reign was not without shadows. In Judea, Hadrian's decision to refound Jerusalem as a Roman colony ignited the Bar Kokhba revolt, one of the bloodiest uprisings Rome ever faced. The conflict devastated the region and left scars that would endure for centuries. It revealed the limits of Hadrian's vision. His desire for cultural unity sometimes clashed violently with local identities. Still, when historians speak of Hadrian, they speak of the emperor who gave Rome a strategy for survival. He chose consolidation over conquest, culture over chaos, endurance over ambition. His walls, both literal and symbolic, reminded Rome that true power is not just in expansion, but in the ability to hold what you already possess. Hadrian was the emperor who taught Rome to pause, to breathe, and to prepare for the centuries to come. Antoninus Pius, the peacekeeper after the globe-trotting, wall-building reign of Hadrian, Rome might have expected another emperor forged in campaigns and reforms. Instead, they got Antoninus Pius, a man whose rule was defined not by conquest or upheaval, but by an almost unprecedented calm. If Augustus gave Rome its foundations and Trajan its greatest reach, Antoninus gave it something far rarer: peace. He came to power in 138 CE, chosen by Hadrian himself. Unlike many emperors who clawed their way to the throne through blood and ambition, Antoninus ascended with little opposition. Perhaps that explains why his reign feels so different. For 23 years, Rome knew no great wars, no crippling crises, no violent shifts of power. In an age where emperors often rose and fell like waves in a storm, Antoninus was steady, consistent, and, true to his name, pious. His style of rule was strikingly hands-off. He rarely left Italy, preferring to govern from Rome rather than march with the legions. Some criticized him for it, but others saw it as a testament to his trust in the system his predecessors had built. And remarkably, it worked. The borders held, the provinces thrived, and the empire remained stable without dramatic displays of force. Instead of waging wars, Antoninus focused on law, justice, and administration. He was known for listening carefully to petitions from provinces, ensuring fairness across the empire. His reputation for integrity became so strong that even centuries later, he was remembered as one of the 5 good emperors, a rare title in a line of rulers often defined by excess and cruelty. But peace did not mean idleness. Antoninus invested in public works, temples, theaters, aqueducts, that improved daily life across the empire. He cared deeply for Rome's infrastructure, ensuring roads were maintained and cities kept flourishing. His era saw quiet but meaningful prosperity, the kind that seldom makes headlines in history, but leaves a lasting mark nonetheless. Perhaps the most overlooked part of his reign was his role as a bridge between 2 ages. Antoninus was guardian to Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher who would later face Rome's most grueling challenges. By raising and preparing his successor, Antoninus ensured that Rome's golden age of stability continued a little longer. And yet, behind the calm, there was a cost. By avoiding expansion and leaving military matters largely untouched, Antoninus may have allowed threats to quietly grow beyond the empire's borders. When Marcus Aurelius inherited the throne, he would face invasions, plagues, and endless wars that shattered the peace Antoninus had preserved. In that sense, Antoninus gave Rome a gift: 2 decades of calm, while also passing forward some of the storms he chose not to confront. Still, in the long scroll of Roman history, Antoninus Pius remains a figure of rare steadiness. He proved that power was not always measured in conquest, but in the ability to keep a vast empire balanced, prosperous, and at peace. For Rome, those quiet years were as valuable as any battlefield triumph. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, when Antoninus Pius died in 161 CE, Rome inherited not only an emperor, but a thinker. Marcus Aurelius, the man who would come to be known as the philosopher king, stepped into power with a stoic's heart and a soldier's burden. He had been groomed from youth for leadership, trained in philosophy, law, and governance. But nothing, no book, no lecture, could have fully prepared him for the storms awaiting his reign. Marcus believed that true strength came not from wealth or conquest, but from discipline of the mind. His writings, later collected as meditations, reveal a man constantly reminding himself of duty, humility, and endurance. Yet philosophy did not shield him from reality. Almost immediately, his reign was tested by war, plague, and political unrest. The northern frontier erupted first. Germanic tribes, sensing weakness, poured across the Danube. Marcus, though not a natural warrior like Trajan, donned the armor and marched north. For years he campaigned with his legions, living in the rough tents of a soldier, not the palaces of Rome, around campfires and battlefields. He wrote his thoughts, notes never meant for the world, but for himself. In those writings you see the paradox of his reign. A philosopher forced to wield the sword, and then came the plague, likely smallpox, sweeping through the empire, decimating populations and crippling armies. Rome's prosperity, so carefully built under Antoninus, now bled away in sickness and fear. Marcus could have despaired, but instead he pressed on, seeing hardship as the natural condition of life. The impediment to action advances action, he wrote. What stands in the way becomes the way. What made Marcus so powerful was not dazzling victories or monumental conquests. It was his ability to lead Rome through suffering without letting it collapse. He appointed honest administrators, resisted corruption, and sought justice even in chaos. He refused to indulge in cruelty or tyranny, a rarity among emperors. To his people he was a ruler who endured hardship alongside them. Yet even the philosopher king was not untouched by tragedy. His beloved wife Faustina died during the wars. His son Commodus proved to be vain and reckless, the antithesis of Marcus's own ideals. Marcus had hoped to pass on wisdom and stability, but instead left Rome to a ruler who would undo much of what he had preserved. Still, Marcus Aurelius's reign stands as a testament to a different kind of power. His legacy was not only in battles fought, but in words that still guide people today. Soldiers remembered him as the emperor who shared their hardships. Philosophers remember him as the ruler who practiced what he preached, and history remembers him as the last of the 5 good emperors, the man who kept Rome's flame alive as storms closed in. Marcus Aurelius was proof that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in conquering others, but in conquering yourself. Diocletian. The reformer, by the late 3rd century, Rome was on the brink of collapse. Civil wars tore the empire apart, generals rose and fell in rapid succession, and invasions battered its borders. The once mighty empire seemed destined to fracture beyond repair. Then came Diocletian, a soldier from humble origins who rose through the ranks, seized the throne in 284 CE, and set out to do what few thought possible: rebuild Rome from the ground up. Unlike Augustus or Trajan, Diocletian wasn't a conqueror seeking glory. He was a problem solver, a man obsessed with order and survival. His vision was clear. Rome could no longer be ruled by a single man stretched across thousands of miles. The empire was too vast, too complex, too unstable. So he introduced one of the most radical political experiments in history: the Tetrarchy. The Tetrarchy divided the empire into 4 parts, each ruled by an emperor, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars. This system allowed for shared authority, quicker responses to crises, and smoother succession. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it bought Rome something priceless: time. For a generation, the endless cycle of civil war eased, and stability, fragile but real, returned. Diocletian also understood that power rested on more than politics. He reformed the army, strengthening the frontiers and professionalizing the legions. He reorganized provinces, improved tax collection, and imposed stricter control over the economy. His infamous edict on maximum prices attempted to freeze wages and prices across the empire to combat inflation. Though it largely failed, it showed his determination to fight economic chaos with every tool at his disposal. But Diocletian's power was not wielded gently. He demanded loyalty and obedience, presenting himself not as a first among equals, but as a figure almost divine. He surrounded himself with elaborate ceremony, requiring subjects to bow before him, establishing a precedent of imperial majesty that would shape Byzantine emperors for centuries. His harshest mark came in religion. Seeing the empire's unity threatened by Christianity, Diocletian launched one of the fiercest persecutions in Roman history. Churches were destroyed, scriptures burned, and believers imprisoned or executed. It was a brutal attempt to preserve traditional Roman order, but in the long run, it failed. Within a generation, Christianity would not only survive but thrive under Constantine. Perhaps the most astonishing act of Diocletian's reign was how it ended. In 305 CE, after 2 decades of ruling, he did something no Roman emperor had ever done. He voluntarily stepped down. Ill and exhausted, he retired to his palace in Dalmatia, where he famously grew cabbages and refused to return to power even when begged. In that moment, he proved that his reign was never about personal glory. It was about Rome itself. Diocletian's legacy is paradoxical. His reform saved the empire from collapse, yet also transformed it into something new, more rigid, more autocratic, less like the Rome of old. But without him, there might have been no Constantine, no Byzantium, no Rome at all. He was the emperor who reforged a crumbling empire with iron discipline and sheer will. Constantine the Great, the Christian emperor. When Diocletian retired, he left behind a system designed for stability. But Rome was Rome. Ambition and rivalry soon shattered the balance. From the chaos of civil war emerged one man whose reign would forever alter not just the empire, but the course of world history: Constantine the Great. Constantine's rise was far from guaranteed. He was the son of Constantius, one of Diocletian's appointed Caesars, but in the brutal world of imperial succession, bloodlines offered little protection. After his father's death, Constantine was proclaimed emperor by his troops in 306. What followed was nearly 2 decades of battles against rival claimants, wars that culminated in one of history's most legendary moments: the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. On the eve of battle, Constantine reportedly saw a vision in the sky, a cross of light and the words, "In this sign, you will conquer." The next day he fought under the Christian symbol and triumphed. Whether legend or truth, that moment marked a turning point. Soon after, Constantine legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan, ending centuries of persecution. What had been a small, persecuted faith would now march hand in hand with the empire itself. But Constantine's power went beyond religion. He reshaped the very geography of Rome's destiny. Recognizing that the empire's strength lay increasingly in the east, he founded a new capital on the site of Byzantium. He named it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. With its strategic position on the Bosporus, it became the crossroads of Europe and Asia, destined to outlast Rome itself by 1,000 years. Constantine was also a shrewd administrator. He reformed the military, strengthened the gold currency, the solidus, and continued Diocletian's system of dividing authority, though now firmly centered on himself. His court glittered with ceremony and power, and his reign marked the full transition of the emperor from general statesman to monarch in the medieval sense. Yet for all his reforms, Constantine's reign was not free of contradictions. He championed Christianity but was only baptized on his deathbed. He promoted religious tolerance but also involved himself heavily in church disputes, calling the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to settle divisions within the faith. His involvement laid the foundations of church-state relations that would shape Europe for centuries, though not always peacefully. Perhaps Constantine's true genius lay in his ability to see Rome's future, where others only saw its past. He recognized that the empire could not simply cling to old traditions. By embracing Christianity, by shifting power eastward, by reinventing the image of the emperor, Constantine ensured that Rome did not just survive, it transformed. When he died in 337 CE, he left behind an empire forever changed. Pagan Rome was fading. Christian Rome had been born. His new capital would become the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a living reminder of his vision. Constantine was more than an emperor. He was a pivot point in history. The man who stood at the crossroads of antiquity and the Middle Ages and chose a path that reshaped the world. Vespasian, the stabilizer, the year 69 CE is remembered as the year of the four emperors, a whirlwind of assassinations, betrayals, and civil wars that left Rome teetering on the edge of collapse. Nero was dead, chaos reigned, and generals across the empire clawed at the throne. Out of this storm emerged Vespasian, a grizzled soldier in his 60s, who seemed an unlikely savior. Yet it was he who brought Rome back from the brink and restored stability to an empire that had nearly devoured itself. Vespasian's background was humble by Roman standards. Unlike the aristocratic Julio Claudians who came before him, he was the son of a tax collector. His rise was earned, not inherited, built on years of military service in Britain, Africa, and Judea. That made him relatable to ordinary Romans, who saw in him not a spoiled patrician, but a hard-working general who understood their struggles. When civil war broke out, Vespasian was commanding legions in Judea, suppressing a major revolt. His soldiers adored him, and when the empire seemed leaderless, they declared him emperor. With steady determination, he defeated his rivals and marched into Rome, not as a conqueror demanding glory, but as a restorer promising order. His reign was marked by pragmatism and common sense. Rome was bankrupt after years of Nero's extravagance and the civil wars. Vespasian tightened finances, raised new revenues, and rebuilt the treasury. He even introduced taxes that sparked grumbling, including a levy on public toilets. When criticized, he famously held up a coin and quipped, "Money does not stink." That blunt practicality defined his style, but Vespasian also understood the power of symbols. To heal the wounds of civil war, he began projects that would unite the people and restore confidence in Rome. His most famous undertaking was the construction of the Colosseum. Rising on the site of Nero's private palace, it was a deliberate message. The excesses of tyranny were gone, replaced by a gift to the people. For generations, the Colosseum would stand as the beating heart of Roman spectacle and imperial authority. Vespasian's power rested not on charm or grandeur, but on reliability. He cut through corruption, rewarded merit, and ruled with a sense of humor that endeared him to many. Unlike emperors who obsessed over their own image, Vespasian never pretended to be anything other than what he was, a soldier who had been thrust into supreme power and intended to use it responsibly. When he died in 79 CE, his final words were a joke. "I think I am becoming a god," a wry nod to the tradition of deifying emperors. It was pure Vespasian, practical, grounded, and unwilling to take himself too seriously. His legacy was not dramatic conquests or sweeping reforms, but something Rome desperately needed: stability. In an age of chaos, he steadied the ship. And in doing so, he proved that true power is not only about expansion or ambition, but about holding an empire together when everything threatens to fall apart. Septimius Severus, the soldier emperor. When Septimius Severus seized power in 193 CE, Rome was once again in turmoil. The previous emperor, Commodus, the unstable son of Marcus Aurelius, had been assassinated, and the empire plunged into another violent contest for the throne. Severus, a seasoned general from North Africa, marched on Rome with the loyalty of his legions behind him. By the time the dust settled, he had eliminated his rivals and founded the Severan dynasty. But unlike many emperors before him, Severus made one thing clear: Rome's future lay in the hands of its soldiers. Severus was a warrior to his core. His rise was built on battlefield victories, and he never forgot the source of his power. He lavished wealth, privileges, and political influence on the legions, ensuring their devotion. To the Senate, this was alarming. The delicate balance between civil authority and military command tilted heavily toward the army. But to Severus it was survival. Enrich the soldiers and scorn all others, he reportedly advised his sons. That single line captured the essence of his reign. Militarization under Severus changed Rome. He expanded the size of the army, increased soldiers' pay, and allowed them to marry while in service, a move that bound military life more deeply to Roman society. Fortresses, roads, and supply networks spread across the frontiers, reinforcing the empire's ability to project power. For common Romans, Severus's rule brought both security and the subtle realization that their fate was now tied to the will of the sword. Severus himself was tireless in campaign. From Britain to Mesopotamia, he led expeditions to strengthen borders and reclaim territory. His war against the Parthian Empire culminated in the capture of Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, a dazzling achievement that reminded the world of Rome's might. In Britain, he pushed deep into Scotland, reinforcing Hadrian's Wall and attempting to subdue the northern tribes. Even in his final years, plagued by illness, he insisted on leading his troops personally. But his reign was not just about battles. Severus also sought to consolidate imperial authority at home. He reduced the Senate's power, relying instead on loyal advisors and military officials. He strengthened the role of the emperor as absolute ruler, a step away from the more collaborative traditions of earlier times. The empire under Severus became less a shared political system and more a military monarchy. Yet his focus on the army came at a cost. The heavy spending to secure military loyalty strained the empire's finances, setting a precedent that later emperors would struggle to sustain. By tying Rome's stability so closely to the legions, he also ensured that future rulers would be judged first and foremost by their ability to command the army's loyalty. In 211 CE, while campaigning in Britain, Severus's health finally failed him. His last words to his sons were simple: be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all others. It was both advice and a warning, a blueprint for power, but also for the dangers of relying too heavily on force. Septimius Severus was the emperor who made the army the true backbone of Rome. He ruled as a soldier, died as a soldier, and left behind an empire forever altered by the weight of the sword. Aurelian, the restorer of the world. By the mid-3rd century, the Roman Empire was breaking apart. Foreign invasions battered its borders. Usurpers claimed the throne, and provinces splintered away to form their own empires. It seemed as though Rome's days as a united power were over. Then came Aurelian, a commander of relentless discipline, a man forged on the frontier, whose very nickname still echoes his achievement: Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world. Aurelian rose from humble beginnings in the Balkans, climbing the ranks through sheer talent and toughness. When he became emperor in 270 CE, Rome was a shadow of its former self. The empire was fractured into 3 parts: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and what remained of Rome in between. Most rulers might have settled for managing decline. Aurelian chose to fight for restoration. First, he marched against the Germanic tribes who had poured across the Danube, crushing them with ruthless efficiency. His discipline was legendary. Soldiers who wavered in battle faced no mercy. Yet this severity kept his legions sharp and loyal, ready to follow him into any campaign. And campaigns were exactly what lay ahead. In the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had carved out her own empire, ruling Syria, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor. Brilliant, charismatic, and ambitious, she styled herself as an equal to Rome. Aurelian would not allow it. In a swift and decisive campaign, he defeated her forces and paraded Zenobia in chains through Rome, a powerful image that proclaimed the empire was whole again. In the west, the breakaway Gallic Empire had claimed Gaul, Britain, and Spain. Once more Aurelian marched. Once more victory was his. By 274 CE, he had achieved the impossible. Rome was reunited, its shattered pieces stitched back into a single empire. Few emperors in history could claim such a feat. But Aurelian was not just a conqueror. He also fortified Rome itself, constructing the massive Aurelian walls around the city, a clear recognition that even the heart of the empire needed protection in turbulent times. He introduced reforms to stabilize the currency and worked to restore confidence in Rome's economy. His reign was short, but it was marked by an energy and determination that revitalized the empire's spirit. Yet fate is rarely kind to Rome's saviors. In 275 CE, while preparing for another campaign, Aurelian was betrayed by his own officers who feared his severity. He was murdered before he could continue his work. Rome mourned, for it had lost not just an emperor, but a rare figure of vision and strength. Even so, his legacy was undeniable. Aurelian had taken a fractured, collapsing empire and, for a brief, shining moment, restored its glory. He was not remembered for gentle rule or lasting reforms, but for his iron will and unshakable resolve. He was, above all, the emperor who reminded Rome that it could still endure. Aurelian's reign was proof that, even in its darkest hours, Rome could still find leaders powerful enough to bind the empire back together. He was truly the restorer of the world. From Augustus, the founder, to Aurelian, the restorer, each of these emperors carried Rome through triumph and turmoil. Some expanded its borders, others defended them, and a few reshaped its very soul. Together they remind us that Rome's greatness was never the work of one man, but a chain of leaders whose power transformed the ancient world. Rome itself may have fallen, but their legacies did not. Their names, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, Constantine, and more, still echo across history. They were warriors, thinkers, and visionaries, each leaving behind a mark that outlived their reigns. These Caesars weren't just rulers of Rome, they were architects of civilization. If this journey through Rome's most powerful emperors inspired you, hit like, subscribe, and share. And tell us in the comments, which emperor do you believe was the true giant of Rome?